This is the Double Doink Dynasty League podcast with Boyer, Andy, and your host, Tyler.
It's impossible.
Season's going to end on a double doink.
Welcome back to Double Doink Dynasty podcast, presented by your performance-enhancing dads. What's happening, fellas?
Not much.
All right, so tonight we're going to have a little bit of something different. We're going to talk trade deadline versus no trade deadline. I've had this debate with a bunch of different people in a couple different leagues, whether trade deadlines are good, whether trade deadlines are bad, whether people have been kind of indifferent about them. So what I want to do is I want to jump into that before we hit Double Doink stuff down, playoff picture, all of that stuff. So a lot of the argument for the anti-trade deadline, right? The people that want no trade deadline. Well, we're not the NFL, right? So why put a trade deadline in? If we were the NFL, we'd have offensive linemen, defensive linemen, safeties. We'd be playing defense. We'd be playing, all of that stuff. It allows for more entertainment throughout the end of the year, allows more trades, because that's what fantasy football is about. It's about trading. It's about trying to win. It's about acquiring the players to make you a champion, right? So a lot of these things have come up in conversation with a couple of my different league mates, and it's been kind of split. So I kind of wanted to get your guys' opinion on trade deadline versus no trade deadline, and where you guys fall on this. So let's start with, we're not the NFL. So if we were, we'd have all these extra players.
And salary caps and contracts and all sorts of shit.
Right. And in Dynasty, yes, we keep our players forever as long as we want until we trade them. But we don't have salaries. We don't have a contract where after 3 years we have to put them back or we have to re-up salaries, right? I mean, the NFL trade deadline's week 8. Nobody's putting their trade deadline at week 8.
Yeah, I think
so
we're just trying to capture some competitive spirit. We're not trying to be exactly what the NFL is, but I don't know. It seems a silly argument.
yeah, I think for me, when you look at the argument of we're not the NFL, fantasy takes a lot of liberties, obviously, with how we set up our game. And obviously you can make whatever game you want to play, and if you got players who are willing to play it that way, go for it. But aside from like contracts and all that stuff that nobody really wants to deal with, when you look at fantasy as a whole, we're trying to capture the best parts of football, the most exciting parts of football. That's why we have a lot of skill positions, wide receivers, running backs, those type of things. But there's a reason why you can't have two Josh Allens too, right? Because if that's what you want, if you want the most exciting parts of football, why can't we just have multiple teams go get Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen? More people rooting for the most exciting players. That sounds great, but in reality, that's not how you're going to get competitive balance. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of teams with the same players. So I think is that you could take it so far that it doesn't, yeah, sure, no trade deadlines. Everybody can have the same players if they want. Who cares? There's a reason why we make those rules and set those boundaries. So that way there's friction. There's a reason to trade. There's a reason to, have strategy and go throughout the year. And the argument of, well, we're not the NFL. It's like, yeah, but we still have to create an actual game and not just this is who I want to have, which is who everybody wants to have.
Right. We need to be managers of our team. And for me, to be a manager of my team is to take that risk, right? If you're going to do it, you're going to do it. To be honest, one of my biggest issues with no trade deadline is if there's no trade deadline and you're a top 4 team and you're going to push playoffs, why buy a guy like Cooper Kupp at week 9 or 10 when he could get injured before playoffs? Why buy another guy, Jonathan Taylor, when he's doing nothing and is injured, and then as soon as he comes back come playoffs and he's hot, then you just buy him? Why waste your picks? Why even trade? Even if you're a losing team holding on to Jonathan Taylor and you think you have a shot, why trade him until you absolutely know that you're out of playoffs? At that point, why not just say trades only happen from week 13 through 17 and just trade in the playoffs when people know they're in or out? Like it's hard because yes, you've got to adjust for injuries, you've got to adjust for whatever. But for me, a lot of it is risk. NFL teams take risks every day. Players get injured. They have to have enough depth to be able to cover injured players.
I mean,
And as
we've got
fantasy man,
a 10-man bench plus a 6-man taxi. Like, yeah, if you lost Cooper Cup, you're not coming back from that, because even if it was after the, or even if you could have traded for somebody, the odds that you wanted to turn around and spend 2 first-round picks on a Stephon Diggs or whatever is probably not high when you just lost a guy. But like, we've got deep benches for a reason. You've got other guys that you can slot in. You ought to have some sort of depth. If you don't, you're probably not a contender, or at the very least, you're rolling dice and letting trades bail you out. It really depends on when. I mean, this could be an argument for not having a trade deadline, because why should I benefit by being able to cover Javante's injury in week 4 and go trade for Miles Sanders this year if you can't cover Kenneth Walker getting hurt late in the season because it's past the trade deadline? So, like, I mean, I get it. The I think part of the idea to play devil's advocate is that in Dynasty, you got to take a long-term view. Even if you're trying to win for this year, you can't completely give up everything, or on the flip side, you can't trade away everything just for draft picks, because you got to have some sort of balance, or you're just never going to, you're either all in for this year or you're never going to get there because it's all just draft picks. You got to have a well-built team for now and later. So most teams that aren't completely new to this, I think, understanding that, kind of hold themselves accountable to be like, okay, well, I'm not going to trade everything for everything. But what we've seen in some of our other leagues is people are willing to go all in on 1 year and know that they're not going to be as good the following year. And if prices go up and the market changes, and 3 years from now, all the sellers are just stashing 2 first-round picks for every decent player on their team, and all the buyers are just in an arms race, then that's tough. But it gets even worse if that's happening going into playoffs. It gets even worse if that's happening going into the championship. And what I don't want to see is I made championship and my opponent then turns around and takes 2 first-round picks to add Josh Jacobs this year, Derrick Henry, and I feel like, oh shit, now I have to go make a move just to be able to stay on even footing in this championship that I made fair and square. Like, that's a kick in the dick. Like,
so
I don't feel like that should be how that works.
so here's part of it. I with that though, some people would say, well, it helps the disparity, the disparity of the league. Like the bottom guy just sold somebody way top dollar to get 2 extra first, and that's going to help them long term. Okay, fine. But the problem is now you're affecting all of playoffs. You're affecting everything that happened all year in one trade in the championship.
Yeah, and I mean, that can and does happen at a trade deadline too, where buyers buy and sellers sell. But I think the benefit is that, especially for the middling teams, there's a point where you have to decide what side of the line you fall on. Are you holding tight? Are you buying? Are you selling? And I think that it generates a lot more intrigue, a lot more excitement in my eyes when there's 5, 6, 7, 8 teams that are like, oh, I'm in the thick of it for wild card, or to win my division, or whatever it is. I mean, I think we had 7 or 8 trades in the last 24 hours before our deadline this year. And looking at all of those middling teams, if they've got the option to wait a week, okay, I won this week, but I'm still kind of not in it. Okay, I'm gonna wait a week. Okay, I lost this week. So now I'm not really in it, but I could kind of get it. Okay, I'm gonna wait a week, and like just less happens, and then all of that just gets pent up, and it just explodes into, okay, well, these are the 4 teams that made playoffs, and now they're all making a mad dash to buy guys and completely overhaul their rosters that got them into playoffs in this 12-man league. And now my roster doesn't even look like the one that got me here. Like, okay, well, the Chiefs made the playoffs, and all of a sudden now they have Tyreek Hill, and they just added Josh Jacobs, and like, it's fucking weird. I don't like how that feels for them to go in to make playoffs and then be like, all right, and now we're plucking superstars because we made playoffs, and we're gonna give it our all, guys. Our team's good, but now it's really fucking good. Like, just play
Yeah.
your team.
And to give a kind of an example, along those same lines, for I mean, everyone loves trade week, right? I mean, with the deadline,
Love
because
the deadline.
everybody can be involved within that, or at least 10 of 12 teams or whatever, and there's a lot of different teams, grabbing guys or selling guys or just maneuvering differently just to try and set themselves up for guys that they like a little bit better. We've had that happen before. But when you look at like say last year for our league, specifically Burns, who won the championship, going through into the into the playoffs, I don't think that we gave him a super legitimate shot to necessarily win. We had Mattoon as the top tier team. He was the guy. And then Burns just kind of was able to, he had his team. He felt good about it. I think he did make some moves towards the deadline, and then his team, looked good throughout the end of the year, looked good throughout playoffs, and then he was able to take it down the juggernaut and win it all. What happens when you move that deadline way back? All of a sudden, a guy like that, who he didn't back into the playoffs, but he trusted his team, he trusted his guys. He made some moves, he made sure he had some depth, and then he moved forward. What happens if Mattoon, who already is a juggernaut, goes and spends the first because he realizes that there's all of a sudden this threat that's coming up against him, and now you don't have that kind of parity in the league that you might have normally when you have a trade deadline where teams have to decide at some point if they're going to keep pushing forward or if they're going to go ahead and move some players so that way they can set themselves up for the next year. And if you lose parity, then it's not a matter of keeping these bottom tier teams interested throughout the year. Now it's a matter of keeping the top or the bottom 8 teams interested throughout the entire year, because there's going to be a middle group of teams that just doesn't care anymore. They can't make a bunch of moves towards playoffs because it's not worth it to sell even at a super high price in the playoffs. But they're not going to make playoffs. They're not going to have a chance against some super teams that are getting a bunch of decent or superstars or whatever from the super bottom team. It just doesn't make any sense. And so I think to give some examples, like real life examples on why that deadline does matter, I think that the parity in the league, I think, has a lot to do with trying to give that deadline there and give these middle teams a chance to fight for playoffs and then fight for the championship going forward.
And so here's another thing right off of that. Burns may not have bought if there wasn't a deadline. He wouldn't have bought. He lost. He loses the next game, and he may not even be making playoffs.
Right. Exactly.
He took the risk. He won the playoffs. Like it's what it is. It's not. And to jump over to another league, I just did this in another league. We have a trade deadline of week 14. So Cooper Cup went down. I bought a week, and I said, all right, I'm still the top scoring team. I'm in second place because, of course, in that league, I'm also the highest points against because that's become a common theme around here. So I'm sitting in second, highest points for, and I lose Cup. So knowing there's a trade deadline, I said, well, shit, I got to buy somebody that I think can be a league winner at this point. And to me, it was Debo. And now he's injured again. But you know what? I went and I took a shot on him. But had that not happened, what do? I sit on that first I paid for him. And I said, wait. I'm the top scoring team. I get to buy the first week of playoffs. Let me see who gets eliminated first week of playoffs and call that team and say, yo, You've got the best player available. Give him to me for a first plus. Changes my whole team. Now I lost Debo. I'm the best team in the league. Losing Cup, losing Debo back to back, that actually gives other people a chance. Like you were saying, I had 2 injuries on 2 good players. And now I can't go buy anybody else. I got to ride some of my extra guys. Now Thielen is becoming a wide receiver 3 for me regularly, which going from Cup and Debo to Thielen isn't ideal, but I had the depth to cover it. Not the way I want to, but I have the depth to cover it because I built my team that way.
I mean, I've got a Thielen that you're going to be okay, but at the end of the day, you have to take that same idea but down a notch. What about someone like right now, Jerick McKinnon is hot, Zonovan Knight is hot. Like those are guys that you could have almost gotten on waivers at some point. When those guys got hot, it's after the trade deadline. So do you go and grab those guys on the waivers as like a championship contender, as a rebuilder? Do you go and grab those guys like a Zonovan Knight, hoping that he works out? Now all of a sudden it's a mad dash because someone could go grab a Zonovan Knight and immediately flip him over to a contender for an actual draft pick for no reason. Like there's not strategy there. There's just, I'm just gonna grab this guy, spend all my fab or whatever. Like if I'm last in the league, I'm spending all of my fab or my top waiver wire or whatever on Zonovan Knight, so that way I can turn over to the top team in the league and say, hey, give me a second for Zonovan Knight. And it's like, well, I know next year Breece Hall is coming back. Zonovan Knight's not going to be double-digit points every week, whatever. So if I get a second round pick out of whatever that waiver wire pick was, that just seems, and that happens every year, whether it's now or even closer to the playoffs or even like when we're in the playoffs. I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown last year was one of those type of players. If he wasn't on a team or if someone didn't have a lot of faith in him, then all of a sudden he blows up, and in playoffs, someone says, here's Amon-Ra St. Brown who's getting 20 points a game because everybody else on his team is dead. Then, like, to me, that doesn't make any sense. Like, you have to take, like, the strategic risk of, am I going to hold on to an Amon-Ra St. Brown who was my second round pick, or am I just going to ship him over and hope that he ends up not being anything? Like you have to make that decision. It's kind of like your talent evaluation is a big deal at the trade deadline. And then all of a sudden it doesn't matter at all when it's week 17 and he's crushing it. And you're like, oh, well, it doesn't matter if I didn't believe in him 5 weeks ago. I can go ahead and just move him for a first now.
Yeah, I don't know. Clearly all 3 of us are pro deadline. We love the risk. We love the reward. We love the strategy of making that move, building that depth, doing what you got to do to put your team in a position to win. We are anti-buying somebody in the championship.
That just doesn't feel right. I would hate that. Like it was like right before the Super Bowl. Can you imagine like the Chiefs or whatever grabbing, like Andy said, to Josh Jacobs or something? Like that would feel so cheap.
It's like, they had an injury. Does that change your mind? Like, no, they shouldn't be able to be like, sorry, Mecole Hardman went down, so we're gonna go grab Justin Jefferson and just plug him in for the Super Bowl because we have the draft picks to do it. Like, get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
All right. So with that, let's go to our league specific, right? So our league, 4 teams make playoffs. We start playoffs week 16. A lot of teams, a lot of leagues start playoffs this week, which for us, our trade deadline is week 12, which in theory is theoretically week 13 because you can trade until the last second of the Monday night game, and you know if you are in or out by that point. I mean, if you're going to lose that week and that kicks you out, sell somebody. By Monday, for the most part, you know by Monday if your team has won that week or lost that week. At that point, shit, I lost this week. I'm out. Let me sell my 2 older players that can go to a contender. Do it then. Why do you have to wait for your contender to championship week to sell them? Sell them, take the risk, take the reward, do it then. Week 13, essentially, because the end of week 12, you have to get through week 13 and 14 and then you start playoffs. Like, if you can't take that risk for 2 weeks, yeah, injuries happen, but injuries happen every year, every week in fantasy football. And you have to adjust. You have to build the depth. You have to be able to play. You have to manage your team instead of buying somebody last minute. That's not managing your team. And I think we would all agree on that.
Yeah, I think so to give another, trying to go real world examples here. Andy brought up a good point where as a manager, you're trying to make these decisions throughout the entire year as far as building your team. And if you're a contender, then you're going to keep trying to build up depth and you're going to give up picks to do so and do those type of things. And this year, when we talked about it, I believe on our last podcast, was that I spent a first round pick on Dak Prescott to try and back up what was a struggling Justin Herbert. And at the time, Herbert looked honestly terrible. He looked awful. He was getting like 13 points a game. And although I believe in him long term, I was very clearly a contender at that point before the trade deadline. So I have to make that decision. Do I go and get another quarterback who I can trust at least in the playoffs to try and face these other contenders? Or do I just hope that Herbert ends up kind of pulling out of it, especially when he gets his guys back and those type of things? Now, maybe I made the wrong call. I spent a first round pick on Dak Prescott, and you guys mentioned it was like, I don't know if the value's there. And it was like, well, that was kind of a little bit of desperation, but that was me managing my team, getting that backup, getting that depth. And now Herbert is starting to play better with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams coming back and those type of things. And it might not end up being a good trade, but that's the risk that I take. And at the end of the day, I still have Dak Prescott, sitting on my bench and whatever I can do, whatever I want to next year with him. But I have to make that decision now. If I didn't have a trade deadline, if I could just go all the way to the championship, I would have just waited out and seen what Herbert was doing and just see what happens. And
there's no need to manage your team. There's no need for depth.
If he still sucks, then at playoffs, then I can go to any other team that has a slightly aging quarterback. We're a one quarterback league. So
and then you wait and figure out what his matchup is.
And then I wait and see
he's got all of his weapons.
Exactly. I see which one is going to be the best quarterback to have. Maybe a quarterback is having a great stretch, and I go and grab that quarterback for a third rounder instead of going for Dak for a first as early as I did. So, I mean, that's managing my team. Whether it was the right decision or wrong decision, I have to make that decision. I have to have some strategy. I have to have some thought behind it. I have to look at my team, figure out what I'm worried about, and if it's going to be worth actually going after. And so I don't like bailing other teams out, especially if they're looking for a championship. And I don't like bailing teams out if they're at the very bottom of the league and they haven't been able to move a guy, or they decided they just want to wait and see if they can't pit two guys together who may have some picks and say, well, hopefully they'll make the playoffs. And if they do, then I'm going to get a freaking king's ransom for this guy. Like, go and negotiate and trade.
Hold on that. That's the next thing I want to talk about. So you led me right into it. In the playoffs, do you think they would get more or less because of the contenders that are still in? In our league, we only have 4 teams in the championship and in the championship bracket. Do you think those 4 teams would pay more, or do you think there's less competition to buy certain players that they might get less? Or do you think it kind of depends upon the situation of what player is available?
Personally, I think it's going to depend on the situation. Right now, we've got, a team like Mattoon has not just a great team, but he's got picks, right? So if you end up finding 2 players that are going up against each other in the first round of playoffs with relatively equally very good teams, you might be able to pit them against each other very, very directly that you might not be able to do with a trade deadline. And you might be able to get a true...
Mattoon bought already this year, right? At the deadline. He spent a lot.
Right, but that's at the deadline. But my point is that we're holding on to our picks now because we can. But we know we're going to make playoffs because we've got the better team. So, like, let's say it's me and Mattoon in week 1 of playoffs. We've held on to our picks. I didn't spend my first round pick on Dak Prescott, So, and I'm sure he does something similar to avoid having to get depth because he knows he's got a good enough team to get there. So now you have 2 teams that have picks and you can directly pit them against each other. To me, that's bailing a team out who's trying to sell, because if you're trying to sell, you should be working multiple teams, multiple angles. You should be making the call that Billy Bean does, where he's, that great scene where he's calling one team, he's talking about one player, he's talking to another team about another player, he's trying to move guys around. Like, that's the fun part of fantasy. It's not just about saying, hey, you play Mattoon, I just offered him this for 2 first, can you give me 3? And it's like, no, but I can give you an extra second. And it's like, okay, go back to Mattoon, do this. Like, that's no, like, let's not do that. Like, I would much rather go to the trade deadline where you have to work 5 or 6 players. And on the opposite side, it could happen where both teams are fine where they're at. They don't have picks anymore, maybe because they were already in a bidding war against each other or whatever. And as a team who's held on to, say, a young stud that you're kind of willing to move because you just need the picks and you're not that good, now there's no one else to sell them to. The middle teams aren't going to spend the draft capital on it. They're out of it. The top teams have already spent, so you didn't get there fast enough, right? You didn't make those communications fast enough, and now you're
one
stuck.
team left. There's one team
Right.
left in the playoffs that
And
has picks, and that
right, and
person
they say,
is the only one that can buy.
right, and they say, I'll give you a second for, Justin Jefferson seems like a dumb choice because he's super young, super good. But you know what I'm saying.
You could say a guy like Devonta Smith that's hot right now.
There you go.
I'll give you a second for
No,
somebody.
I'll give you a third. Devonta Smith is worth a second. I'll give you a third for Devonta Smith. And someone says, yeah, I just want him off my team at this point. But it could go the opposite way. And again, that's to managing your team early and often, where you're constantly talking to players saying, hey, I have Devonta Smith. I know I'm not good. I don't see him as part of my building block. Do you want him as a depth piece, as a flex option? I see you're weak at wide receiver. I see that you need an extra piece over here. Like, that's where trading is fun. It's not fun when you have 1 or 2 guys that you're like, okay, well, I want to, like, it's easy, sure. But if you want the easy way out, then honestly, don't play Dynasty. Go back to redraft.
All right, Andy, last comments on this, and then we're going to move into the Double Doink League.
I mean, for me, what it comes down to is I like that a trade deadline forces a line in the sand where roughly half the teams say I'm holding or selling, and roughly half the teams say I'm holding or buying because they feel like they're good or bad. Letting it go on longer than that is going to lead to issues where you end up with nobody making moves until you've only got 4 or even 2 teams left. The other 8 teams or 10 teams are sitting there just waiting to see what they can do with it. And it's going to create more. I mean, the trade deadline already creates chain reactions where a contender buys and then another contender's like, oh shit, I got to buy. Like, that just gets amplified if that's happening in playoffs when I am staring at a team across from me this week and seeing him go and add a superstar. And I know I have to add a superstar. And like, sure, trading's great, but I don't think that that's the intent of what trades are for. Trades are for your team, not for a matchup. And I strongly disagree with there being any form of trading in the playoffs or even once things are starting to be pretty decided. That's why our trade deadline is, a few weeks before that all settles out, because that's the excitement of it. You have to decide where you're at, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And it sucks. Guys get hurt. Guys start doing poorly. Guys start doing great. And that's part of the excitement of fantasy football. And I don't want to take that away by saying, okay, well, whoever makes it to the championship can just turn all their picks in for studs and win it, because that's not fun for anybody.
Yep. All right. My last comment is it's a risk reward situation. Like I've said before, you either buy or you don't buy. Kind of like Andy was just talking about. You make that decision. You're in, you're out. You hold. It doesn't matter, but you have to make that decision at some point before playoffs. So wherever that trade deadline is, I like it where we have it, the end of week 12, because that gives us 2 weeks to finish up regular season before we hit. So go ahead, Boyer.
I just want to say is that I noticed that there are a lot of people who have differing opinions, as you have seen there in the real world, Ty. So if you have those opinions, comment. Let us know what your thoughts are. If you have other things that we didn't touch on this, like, let us know. And
what are we missing?
Maybe maybe if you bring up a good idea, maybe we'll bring you on the podcast and we'll talk about it in the off season. But that's a thought process that I know a lot of, especially early leagues, go through. But I think is that there's the benefits of a deadline just far outweigh the having no deadline at all. It just, to me, it just doesn't make a ton of sense. So
And like we said at the very beginning of this, everybody plays Dynasty, everybody plays redraft, everybody plays keeper leagues different. Everybody has a different philosophy. So like I get that. But for all of us specifically, we all really enjoy the trade deadline. We all really think it is actually a benefit to the league because people do have to buy in or out. And you guys very well may have different opinions. You guys may have different philosophies on how Dynasty is played. So please let us know, because we are trying to figure out what is best. But trade deadline seems like the best case scenario for a Dynasty league. So with that, appreciate you guys coming on this ride with us through the rant. Now let's get into our league. Comment on what your thoughts are, your opinions. You know, if you want more of this, we're going to try to hit more of this fun stuff in the offseason, more generic Dynasty, maybe commissioner decisions, where we want to go with things, how we've already adjusted our leagues accordingly. But we're gonna deal with that later. Right now, let's hit playoff picture for Double Doink Dynasty. With that, Boyer has clinched playoffs. Andy has clinched playoffs. Mattoon has clinched playoffs. I am sitting at 7-7. Burnsy's at 7-7. Jerfry is at 8-6, and Kelly's at 7-7. These are the four teams left to possibly make playoffs. Jerfry holds their own destiny. With the current 8-6, they play Kelly this week. If Kelly takes over Jeremy, they will both be 8-6. They are currently 8-7. My fault. They will both be 8-7, and they are currently within a point of each other. So if Kelly beats Jeremy, he leapfrogs them for the wild card due to points for. Because if he's going to beat him, by probably more than
-2.
Right. So that would put Kelly in the driver's seat over Jerfry. But you have Burns playing Underhill this week. Burns is at 7-7. He could jump to 8-7 as well. And he has more points than Kelly. So Kelly needs a Burns loss if he wants to get in. Myself, I'm at 7-7. I played Boyer this week, so I have an uphill battle to start with. But if I beat Boyer, that also puts me at 8-7. So that could put us in a four-way tie. With a four-way tie, Burns is going to take the playoffs because he's got by far the most points for. That's our tiebreaker. He's got the spot. So Jerfry holds his own destiny, their own destiny. If they win, they're in. If Jerfry loses, Burns holds his own destiny. He wins, he's in. If Kelly beats Jerfry, and they both end at 8-7, and Underhill beats Burns, and that leaves Burns at 7-8. I beat Boyer, putting me at 8-7. That would leave me, Jerfry, and Kelly all at 8-7, and I am currently down by
8 points.
8 points to the two of them. So that would put us in a three-way tie going to points 4. So at that point, it's going to be a fun end of the race, end of the season here. But for that to happen, Underhill needs to win. I need to win. Kelly needs to win.
Yeah, mainly cheering for Kelly here because that's what makes things interesting. Sorry, Jeremy.
Well, kind of, because if Burns wins at that point, Burns is in. If
but I
Kelly
mean,
wins,
that's still what makes it interesting.
Right.
If Kelly wins, then everybody else's matchups matter. Otherwise, if Jeremy wins, Jeremy wins. If Jeremy and Fryer win, then they're in. So that kiboshes the whole thing.
Right. And then, so the other kind of fun thing that we talked about earlier is our current draft order is based off max points for missing any payout games, missing the championship, missing consolation championship. At this point, if Jer Fry misses, it would go Lesack, Nolan, Paul, Jeremy. Paul is currently beating Jeremy and Fryer by 3 points. He's under them by 3 points. So that could flip in a heartbeat. But if Jer Fry makes playoffs, because they hold their own destiny, he would go from pick 3 or 4 up to the last 4 picks. So Jer Fry's range right now is 3 to 12. Kelly's range right now is about 4 to, I guess, 3 or 4 to 12 if he ends up getting in. So the only 3 that are really locked in the bottom right now are Lesack, Nolan, and Paul. Which does make this fun for the end of the year, because who the heck knows where we're going to end up here. Andy,
Ty,
yep.
Ty, real quick, if I remember right, you own the Jer Fry first round pick. Is that right?
I do.
So best case scenario, Colin beats Jer Fry, Underhill beats Burns, you cover the points, get into playoffs, and Jer Fry then ends up with a bottom 4 pick to where you make playoffs and get a bottom 4 pick.
Well,
I don't feel like that's fair. I don't know if the universe is going to allow that.
the downfall is if Jer Fry misses playoffs, he's going to probably be they're going to be consolation because they are the top team right now, which means they still got a chance for that 5th, 6th place game, which would still put me at bottom 6 picks, but different than 3rd or 4th.
Still, that's got to feel good if you make playoffs and you get. That's the right pick to have over your own at that point. But man, if you can manage a bottom 4 pick somehow and make playoffs, that would just be just a steal of the century.
Here's the crappy part. I traded Matt's pick for the Mahomes trade instead of the Jer Fry pick. So if Matt ends in the bottom 4 and Jer Fry ends up in the championship, that looks like a terrible trade.
Oh yeah, right. There's a lot riding on that one pick.
Right. But to finish that out, Burns, Underhill, Matt are probably, even if they miss consolation championship, they're taking that 4th place pick. They could drop down. They could still end in that, or they're taking that 5th, 6th place pick probably. So Burns, Underhill, Matt are taking those late picks if they don't make playoffs. So really the bottom 4 are going to come down to a combination of Lesack, Nolan. They've got that covered. Paul's got it covered. And then it could be Jer Fry, Kelly, or me. Those are really the other 3 that could end in the bottom. So
yeah, one thing I want to bring up just real quick is Underhill, I think, is a top 3 scoring team, and he's 6-8 right now. So I just kind of want to give him a little shout out to obviously having a good high scoring team. It hasn't worked out for him this year. Hopefully, that can continue for him in the constellation, but have some better luck because, he's been a relatively dangerous team as a top 3 scoring team.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Yeah. So I think we kind of did predictions at the beginning of the year. A lot of things have changed because of all the trades that happened, because of all
the deadline and
yeah, because people didn't just hold until the last week of playoffs.
Weird, right?
But Paul is kind of where we expected him to be. Underhill, I think, is kind of where we expected him to be, about the 6 win mark. Nolan is where we expected him to be. But outside of that, I don't think we expected Andy to get to 12. Boyer and Mattoon at 10 seemed pretty reasonable about where we expected them to be, top of the division. Clearly the Mahomes trade, Kenneth Walker, worked out well for me, put me up to 7-7. Matt's not had great luck this year. He's
Matt's the one that surprises me. I felt like with McCaffrey and Kelsey that he was going to be a 500 or better team. I think I had him at 8-7 in my preseason rankings. So 5-9 right now is a real disappointing year for him.
Yeah. And to be fair, I don't know what I had him as. Do we have a record keeper letting me know?
Sorry,
no,
we never did the podcast for that one. We just wrote it down and then did it like a month later. So I don't have it all well documented.
So I think I had him doing, about that well, like, 500 or better for sure. But about midway through the year, started to see the wheels fall off because the team around those three guys just did not seem to be up to par. And I don't know about you guys, but I started offering him lots of picks for those top players, and he's stayed steadfast. So, maybe those three guys as his core can do something next year, but I'm very surprised that the rest of his team has let him down so hard.
His wide receiver core killed him this year,
Mhm.
and that's what it came down to.
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
Tua was a pleasant surprise. Obviously, Saquon and McCaffrey were studs, and so was Kelsey. So, I mean, the bones were all there, but he got nothing going on his receivers. And I mean, he had guys in the preseason looked like they were going to be studs, like Sutton and Deontay, and even Elijah Moore had a lot of hype around him, and just nothing panned out at wide receiver for Matt.
I mean, that's why, before the deadline, you got to make that choice. Do you make that choice to try and go grab some receivers, or do you think you're already far out of it? So we'll see if he made the right decision going into next year with all his picks.
Yep.
yeah. So he doesn't have a first until 25 right now. So
Whew.
see how that plays. Benefit for Matt is if Saquon doesn't end top 5, which it's not looking that way because of this injury that happened.
And the fact that he's on the Giants.
Well, he's who's running back number 6 right now?
Saquon?
No, I think
No,
it's
Saquon's
it's
7.
Miles Sanders.
Ah, no.
No,
Nope.
Who is it, Ty?
Last I checked, it was that there Tony Pollard passed up Saquon. So
Wow.
you want to talk about him being on a bad team with the Giants? Pollard's been splitting carries all year and passed him.
Yeah, he's also like on a better team than the Cowboys.
Yeah, but if you want to say a better team, he's got CD, he's got Zeke to split carries with.
Yeah, but they're also in more positive game scripts than the Giants are.
Right. But if had he ended top 5, I would have gotten Matt's second round pick this year, which would have put him back to just a 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Would have been even worse for him, but it doesn't. It looks like he's gonna be lucky enough to hold that second.
At that point, you just quit the league and go find another one, right?
But don't tell him that because he might. Before we hit any other surprises or whatever, let's hit a little. How? What you drinking? Anybody got beer, water, anything left?
my ice is melting.
Oh, nice. Boy, what are you drinking? I can't read it from here.
It's a
Still a
triptych.
dank meme.
Thank me.
Nice. Good
Oh,
promotion.
I'm about to have to switch over to the Natty Light, which is as good as water, right? So
So I switched over to I got off my peach whiskey from the last one, and now I'm on a salted caramel. I'm trying a couple of the different
How's
flavors.
that?
Ooh.
That sounds good.
It's actually pretty good. A lot of people give me crap because like, oh, flavored whiskey, blah blah blah. But it's actually pretty good.
That sounds good.
So it is a
What brand?
Bird Dog. It's
Bird
my
Dog,
go-to
okay.
flavored whiskey.
Sure.
Bird Dog is
So
good.
it came in the peach pack with 2 extras. It was a honey and a salted caramel. And I said, well, I better buy that because it's the same price. So then I get an extra couple shots. I get to try this one, and it's actually pretty good. Straight up on
I
the
do
rocks.
like the Tennessee honey whiskey too.
Oh, yeah,
Jack
absolutely.
Daniel- Oh man, that's so smooth.
So, but anyway, I'm rocking more different flavored whiskey on the rocks tonight. Saving the soda calories out of this. That's what I care about. I don't know, but anyway, any last surprises from Double Doink for this moment, or do you guys want to at this point take a shot on who's going to be wild card and your champion?
Yep, I know we made these picks a couple weeks ago, but I'm gonna stick with Burns for wild card, and for champion, I'm gonna go with Mattoon.
Boyer?
I'm looking real quick. I gotta look at some of the matchups now that they've solidified a little bit. Yeah, I'm gonna go with Burns wild card. But I'm gonna go with Andy for championship.
All right. Um, I am. I'm gonna take Fry for a wild card as much as it hurts me to say. They're the front runners. I'm not a huge fan of Kelly's team. So I think and they're projected to lose this week so far, but we know how well projections play out. So
What do you mean? They're 100%.
yeah. So as much as I hate to say it because I want that pick to be earlier, I think Fry ends up hitting that wild card. And I'm gonna take Mattoon as well for the champion as of right now. So
Toon's team has struggled the last couple weeks, so
yeah,
that's why I'm thinking Andy's team. He's been strong all year. I like Andy's team to take it home.
I hope
all
so.
right.
We'll see.
You're in most points for. I
Yeah,
mean,
I'm still
we talk
surprised
about
by that.
yeah. I mean, we talk about Mattoon's team being like the front runner, but you have been for a good chunk of the year, if not the majority of it at this point. I feel like
Yeah, I know
so.
Mattoon was leading in points for the first like half of the year, and then I've caught him up because I mean Josh Allen, Nick Chubb, Jonathan Taylor have all not been great lately. Diggs has slowed down, and then guys like Pittman and Mike Evans are just nowhere
Mhm.
near what you would have expected them to do. So
Right. So that I mean his team we on paper looked really good at the beginning of the year, but in the back half of the year it just hasn't worked out, and your team has. So
yeah,
And
that's I think that your
getting
team
Mike
keeps
Williams
rolling.
back. Mike Williams back for playoffs is going to be big for you.
yep. Which means I'm benching Ayuk now, Ty. How do you feel about that?
You could play Ayuk over Singletary.
I probably will.
So I'm not worried about it because um but all right, with that, appreciate you guys coming along with us on that nice debate off the start. Looking forward to this week for playoffs and wild card picture and all that fun stuff. Good luck this weekend. Happy birthday to me. We're out.